Welcome back to Kit Car Direct and MK Sportscars. Here we have this week's update on the RX-5 factory build, which has just received its engine. After fitting the clutch and flywheel and changing the clutch release bearing in the bell housing of the gearbox, it was time to mate the gearbox up to the engine block and get that all bolted in. As you can see here, we are fitting our adapter plate to the rear side of the gearbox, where it will fit over the mount in the transmission tunnel. After preparing all of this and a lick of paint on the engine, it was time for the engine to go in, making sure not to touch any of the chassis in the process. Now we will pass you over to Sean to give you a rundown of what else has been happening on the factory build.
So we're going to go through with you a bit more detail, like we're trying to show you where we're at with the Mazda base kit. Now, part 1 and part 2's kind of explored fuel lines, brake lines, rear diff, fuel tank and all that, etc. And then what we're going to focus on here today is more the front end, the engine and how that's gone in, and the gearbox. Now, I'll start with a corner, I suppose. Let's start with this first. So what we've got is a double A arm setup, here and here. A bottom wishbone, a top wishbone. We use the Mazda MX-5 upright. Now, this particular item here, which is the bearing and the bearing carrier, is a serviceable item. If your one's good, then fine, you can leave it on your donor vehicle, but if not, you can buy this as a complete component with all the studs and the bearings already pressed in. They're not massively expensive. We sell those here as well and normally have them in stock. We've serviced these and recommend you would probably do as well, depending on how many vehicle miles it's done on your donor, but it looks nice, clean, shiny as well, and saves you building a car and then 5 or 6 months down the line having to do the bearings. So I would recommend changing that component there and say it comes a complete unit with all the studs, everything done on there. The only thing you need to do is undo the nut on here, slide the new one on, put the bearing grease in, and away you go. Then we've got here the steering rack. Now, different variations, 2.4 or 2.2 rack that we do. This mounts onto our brackets here and here with 4 M8 bolts. This runs out here then to our steering rack extensions. These are specific for the RX-5. The Ford ones are very much different because they come on from the M14 down to a fine thread here, and this is an existing Mazda MX-5 track rod end. Now we can supply them. Again, it may be a serviceable item that's on your component of your donor vehicle, or probably again I'd recommend if the rubbers are split, either replacing them. They're a very inexpensive part. Now that's the steering rack complete, both sides. Bolts on, you have a lock nut here to tighten it on, and this one is your adjuster here for your toes, so you can undo the lock nut here, and then it's a little 17mm spanner. Basically you can then turn this to adjust your toe in and out once this lock nut here and this one. So I'd leave those loose while you're doing the assembly. There's no point tightening them up at this moment in time because you're going to assemble and do the tracking. Then we get onto the bottom bolt here. This is the bottom ball joint. This is a Mazda bottom ball joint right here. We use that off the donor vehicle. Again, like I said earlier, a serviceable part, so maybe look at reconditioning or new ones of those. And we use the original fixing point on the third point for it, and we use this M10 by 110 bolt here that goes through. That's your front assembly done on this side of it here, running through to our top wishbone. These use a poly bush, and what we have in here is a poly bush here, 2 halves with a crush tube that joins the two, and then we use a M12 by 70 mil bolt, which is a hex bolt that bolts through too. I'd recommend you, obviously these needs to be greased. You can use a rubber grease, silicone grease. I wouldn't use normal bearing grease. One of these that are sort of more of a waterproof, so it doesn't wash out in the wet or when you jet wash or hose down your vehicle. This runs along then to another top ball joint. This one's going to adjust your camber for your wheel up and down. This is a part that we supply in our kit. It's a threaded component that we use that fits in for this. It's not the Mazda donor component, so this is one that we supply that fits in our wishbone and onto the top upright, and that will adjust again. So this bottom bolt, I would again, this comes with a nylock on it, which I'm loosely going to undo here and show you, because it has the blue plastic part to it, so I would leave that again just finger tight, so that when you come to adjust your camber at the end, once the vehicle is on the ground, you can get that set. And once you do this under this lock nut, you can undo it, twist it either way for positive or negative camber. This one here, you're going to think this is new, because normally a lot of kits, so we used to do existing, a lot of kits supply the headlight brackets off of this. Our new design bracket goes through the top wishbone bracket, so if you're going to a track day, you could actually unbolt this and take your headlights off if you have a plug, and it has the built-in indicator and the headlight will sit on top here. We do a few different variations. We do this one, which is a standard one for IVA, or we do a lowered version for a race, but this is what will come with standard if you order it in the kit. And it bolts through with a 75mm bolt here, not 70 like this, 75mm, because you've got the existing bracket plus this plus washers, so it's slightly longer, so that the thread of the bolt goes through the nylock here. Bolt them on at the same time. Right, next job on the front end. It's quite a lot going on here, but doesn't actually take that long to assemble. We have our push rod set up for our rockers. Now the rockers are here, joined onto our suspension. Now there is a separate video for this on how to assemble the rockers, and I'll get Lewis to post a link up to that on how the bearings press in, and we assemble then with this washer that screws onto the axle, so that this rotates all on that onto your, well, our supplied Protect shocks that we have here. These have a 300 on a Mazda car, 325 pound spring on the front, and it is this one. Now the difference between these two is this has a rose joint end, so that it can rotate with it. If you use a bonded bush on there, it would just twist the bush. And I'll show you the difference between the two here, front and rear. Rose joint and the bonded bush. This has a rubber bush inside there, which you cannot use in the front. So when you've got your shocks, making sure that you identify the rear is 14" in length with a bonded bush, and the front one is a rose jointed and actually 13" in total length, eyelet to eyelet. This then runs down. You've got two, again, 70mm bolts. And there is a trick to assembling this. I would recommend that you obviously stabilise this in a format that you can actually work on it. We tend to put the shock in on the top bolt first, and then strop it down. So this one first, the 70mm in, because then you can lift it past the chassis, bolt it in, then drop it down, and then do the bottom one, which mounts in the centre of the vehicle. It's much easier. If you're trying to do the bottom one first and then push this in, it's very tight to slide it past the chassis here. So top one first, bottom one second. This then runs down to your push rod, which has two little 8mm shims that sit between the rose joints here. And we have a left-handed and right-handed thread rose joint. So one of them is left-handed, one of them is right-handed. And what this allows you to do, once you undo these lock nuts, again, keep these finger tight, because you're going to adjust the height of the suspension. You can do it. This will adjust, it winds to lower or raise the bottom wishbone on the damper as well. So this will in and out basically, so that's nice. And these are an M12 by 1.25 rose joint. So that's kind of your front end section of all the wishbones, all the rockers, all suspension, and the final piece in the puzzle here is the radiator. Various different options on the radiator. This is like the standard one that's supplied in the sort of 9995 kit. This one here is a 32mm outlet, and it bolts onto our radiator brackets. Now our radiator brackets we have here, they bolt through 2 bolts, and it picks up automatically. It's a laser cut part that picks up onto your fixings of your radiator. Now you can upgrade these to an aluminium radiator, which fixes in the same position, but you can go from anything from 40mm up to 70mm in diameter, which if you were looking for better cooling or turbocharging your vehicle, I'd recommend you put the biggest radiator on earlier on in the stage rather than wasting this here. You would need to blank this off here, which is normally the fan switch is fitted on these radiators. You don't need that because this is going to be controlled by the ECU. And then you have your fan here, which is fitted through. We use a cable tied with washers on this particular one. There is fan kits available out there, other ones, but they tend to fail. Our best solution so far has seemed to be this type of kit here with this particular radiator. Right, so you've seen how this engine went in earlier. It's pretty simple actually, because we supply the engine mounts that bolt up to your block here, which mounts onto a 35mm heavy duty rubber mount. So recommendation is bolt this in loosely, again under here, leave the engine mount on both sides, bolt both of your engine mounts to the block. You've got a left and a right. They are patterned differently, so you can see that it can only pick up in these 3 holes. This side and that side, they are completely different mounts, so it can only mount in one position. Obviously before that you would have prepped probably your engine and gearbox, and again inside here, if you've got a clutch, if it feels good and you've checked it out and inspected it, then maybe you can run it, but if not, maybe look at the alternative of a serviceable item, which a clutch plate is, of reservicing the clutch. If the flywheel may be probably all right, to be honest with you. I've not seen many that are that bad, but a clutch will be doing it. And of course, if you're going turbo, big turbo, etc. at a later date, it may be advisable and much more cost effective to fit the heavy duty clutch. Now, a normal standard clutch can take sort of 200-ish horsepower. On the turbo, you're okay for that up to about 215 horsepower, but after that, you definitely need to go heavy duty clutch. Now on this particular engine, you would have seen it on the B-roll where it comes through, it slots through. We have the 2 engine mounts that fit here, and then we have a center mount here, which again, leaving the bolts loose. This plate here is something we supply in the kit that bolts to the gearbox. We have 2 bolts under here, 1 and 2, and then this has a little U-bracket cut out so that you can literally slide this in loosely and drop the gearbox and in position. The prop shaft that links here from there to the diff, this is a Mazda one that we modify. We offer that as a service and modify exchange. It's too long as standard as it comes off the Mazda, and we do modify that to a specific length, which are then going to bolt up to your differential. Before you do this, you can see the gear levers fitting on this. Little top tip for you guys out there, make sure you unbolt this before trying to get it in, because trying to slot that in under there, top tip, remove that. It's just 4 little M8 bolts, I think they are on those actually, 4 little M8 bolts on there to take that off. You may see some oil come out of this if you haven't drained the oil on it, so drain the oil on the gearbox. You're probably going to service that and put new oil in anyway. Right, what I've done now, moved over to the other side of the vehicle because quite a lot has gone on. This particular alternator is off the Mazda MX-5 as it is off the donor vehicle. This needs to be wound in as short as possible for it, and for that we have a different belt. We supply a much shorter belt than standard MX-5 one, because normally that would have an air conditioning pump and everything else that goes on it, power steering pump, so it's a different kind of belt. So we can supply you with a belt that is shorter, that does that winds the alternator in, and this is your adjuster here for it just there, and you lock it off, and that will also clear the steering column. So while we're here though, starter motor has gone in, and then we're running the battery cables here. One up from the alternator into the starter motor, and then this will run up and back up to wherever you're going to position your battery. We've terminated this with a blank at the moment once we put the battery in situ, but it's best to put these in if you've got your inlet plenum off. It's much easier to work under here with the inlet plenum off. If you haven't and you've done that, then I would suggest that probably working under here without the side panel on. So do the wiring before you put the side panel on, just so it gives you nice clear access. We spoke the other day, all the brake lines, fuel lines, and it's gone in. We've stuck it on now, which is this. You need a DOT4 compliant sticker to show that what fluid you're using. Probably put that in now, just nice and easy access. Then we get into the steering column here. Now this part of the steering column is off your donor MX-5, and we modify that. We actually lengthen it by a considerable amount, but it is collapsible, which makes it then IVA compatible. We lengthen it. It's just an exchange process part that we can do with you, and then it comes up to your top mount part of your steering column off your donor vehicle. This bolts on with a clamp here, the existing UJ and bolt, and then obviously you're going to have your column, your wiring, your key and everything else here. We'll put all the shroud back on afterwards. You may want to leave that on, it's not a problem, you can leave that on. We normally take it off just so when we're going to do the modifications to the dashboard to make it fit. Wiring is next, guys. This is where we're at now. This is going to be possibly different depending which route you're taking, if you're doing the donor loom or you're doing our brand new existing loom. This is a new brand new existing loom that we're using, which is our loom that we incorporate into a Motorsport Electronics 360 ECU. If you're using a donor one, it still sits in a similar position, but there is in the manual quite a bit of work to do on the loom just to shorten it, because there's lots of things you don't need, like the electric aerial and some of the other radio component parts and everything else, and switches for electric windows. All of those need to be removed, but that is listed in the well documented manual and about how you strip your loom. But what you have to do is bear in mind the principles are the same. You'll have an ECU panel which we supply in the kit, which will mount your ECU nice and stable, and we also have these areas. This bracket's the same here, bent over, and the fuse and relay box will mount accordingly for that. Now when you're routing this, we pre-drilled all of these so they fit under. You've got these saddle bushes that are fixed in and then a cable tied to hold it in, and the distance between these, maximum distance is 300. We recommend going much shorter. We like it between 150 and 200 mil. Very, very similar to your brake line type of fixings when you're doing that. So it's just make sure it's safe and nothing's going to move, and we try to tuck it in and hide it under where you can. So if you're drilling and fixing these in beforehand, drilling and fixing in your saddle bushes, it hides the loom nice and tidy, so that when you pop the bonnet, you know, you haven't got loads of wires everywhere. It just hides it away nice and tidy. This is, we haven't started on this yet. When we look at this, we've got to route this in once it's in. This is the loom for the ECU. This is everything that needs to make this engine run. It's much more simpler if you are doing the 360 ECU route. We provide these as a brand new component loom, and it is plug and play, and that is going to be fitted in. And then from here, where you've got your components here, we have the fuel lines running. Again, something, because you've got the plenum here, I would suggest definitely putting in the fuel lines here. There's a pickup point here, depending which one you have. This is a Mark 2.5, it only has one, but normally the Mark II has two. I'd put these in even if you leave them hanging ready to connect here. It's just that once the inlet manifold is on, it's very, very difficult to get under here and get it secured with a Jubilee clip. So I'd recommend putting that in as early as possible. The loom will then run back through the ECU hole, and again you're going to run that with a saddle bush here. We've got saddle bushes fixed in position, drilled and riveted with a cable tie. We're leaving this all in loose at the moment while we secure it and we do the check. And again, we've gone between sort of 150 and 200 mil, 300 mil being the maximum. Right guys, I think that's a wrap for episode 3. We'll tie that up, but of course if you've got any questions or things, information you need to know, fire down on the question down there. We will happily answer for you. Obviously there is a manual and a guide that will go along with this. This is just showing a bit more detail of some of the parts that have gone on. And then of course, join us on episode 4. We're going to talk about handbrake levers, handbrake cables and everything else, and share that information with you guys. That's it for this week guys. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next episode.